Hello and welcome to your notes on memory part 4. On these notes we are just going to be focusing on retrieval. So there's things already encoded in your brain and we're working on getting them back out. So we've actually already practiced a couple of these today in class. So some of them will be, I primed them for you. But hopefully some of these is kind of more of a review and then you have something in your notes that you can study off of. Okay? Warning, I'm dressed in a jersey from Spirit Day in case you're watching this in the future, and the lights keep going off, so I'll try and not make this an awkward lecture. Okay, so let's talk about our first 3 vocab words and ones that we've definitely already talked about in class. So getting information out, there's a couple different ways in which you can get information out of your long-term storage. So recall, recognition, and relearning, or 3 R's of retrieval. Oh, that's 4. All right, retrieval, recall, recognition, relearning. So when you recall a word, that is like a fill in the blank test. You have to like pull it out of your memory and recall the entire word. There's no type of what I want to say like word bank. You're not matching anything up. You just have to like memorize it and recall it out. Versus recognition, we've talked about this for your AP test. On a multiple choice test, you have to be able to recognize the definition of a word. So if you are, the question is asking what is the definition of memory, for your FRQ, you would have to recall that. Right? So you would have to, from your memory, pull it out and write down, there goes the lights, write down the word. Versus recognition, that would be the multiple choice, okay? And then relearning is a new definition word. It's the amount of time it takes to relearn information that you've already learned. So for instance, we already did that list where you looked at the brick can be used as a doorstop. Guitar can be used as a canoe. So when we're relearning, that would be the amount of time it takes for you to relearn information that you've already learned once before. So it's already in your brain, you've made those neural pathways, but they're not very strong. So relearning would be the amount of time it takes to relearn information that is already stored in your brain. Now, retrieving information can be made easier by something called retrieval cues. Again, we did this in class. So this is when you looked at the back of that blue list. Let's see if I have the blue list. Aha. So the back of the blue list was this right here. And we looked at these retrieval cues. So this was a list of words that when you saw it, it made an immediate association. It makes associations easier. Right? So if you saw brick, you then remembered a doorstop. Or if you saw flashlight, you remember the word that was associated with that. Mnemonic devices work similarly. There's some type of either rhyming or visual way to help you remember, whether it's a sequence or Roy G. Biv is a mnemonic device. So it's some way to help you improve your memory. And then priming. We've talked about priming a little bit, so I'm going to give you an example here. But it's some way of like making associations so that learning is more likely to occur. So making associations so that more learning is likely to occur. And you can actually kind of skew what type of learning is or words that are going to come out by priming with pictures or words. So for instance, if you say something in a positive light and then you ask people's opinions on it, you might be priming them to say something positive. The way you word a question can prime someone to answer in that way. You might be unconscious of the way you're doing that, but priming is a way to build associations. Okay, so here's another example of priming. This right here is an example of retrieval cues. It says, let me refresh your memory. It was the night before Christmas and all through the house. Not a creature was stirring, just even a mouse. Sometimes if you just start that beginning of a familiar book or a poem, you're able to keep going, but someone needs to like start it for you to retrieve it. So here's an example of priming. If I were to see or hear the word rabbit, right? So either can someone said rabbit or I see the word rabbit. That would activate this concept in my mind, right? Versus if I were to see or hear the word hare, H-A-R-E, it might activate a picture of a hare or a picture of a rabbit. But if I said the word rabbit, this was the word that where the picture would come up. And then when I'm asking you to spell hare afterwards, so if it went in that sequence, you'd be more likely to spell the word H-A-R-E than you were to spell the word H-A-I-R, because I primed you with the picture of a rabbit. Right, so that's your brain making associations so that you're more likely to say one thing or learn one thing or another. Okay, so that would be priming. So now let's look at how your context or your environment can affect memories, all right? You are probably very familiar, so I want you to think context is your environment. So think about like if you've ever forgotten why you get up to do something. All right, so you are upstairs writing your notes right now and your pencil breaks and you're like, oh my gosh, the pencil sharpener's downstairs. And you're walking downstairs like trying to think about other things, or you know, you get a text message and all of a sudden you're downstairs and you're like, why did I come downstairs? You can't remember. And then all of a sudden, but you can stop and be like, and retrace your steps. You're like, okay, I was upstairs taking my notes and my phone, oh my gosh, my pencil. That's why I came downstairs. So that's like a context effect. Like your environment can alter or like change your memory, or not necessarily change. Your environment can like somehow bring back memories. Sometimes I ask, or sometimes a good test taking strategy is to put yourself back in the context in which you learned it. And we'll talk about with that in your environment in the next one. So encoding specificity is when you learn it in a certain environment, you're more likely to recall it in that environment. All right, so if you can't remember something, sometimes if you put yourself back in that context, like, okay, I was at my desk and I can see Miss Myers in front of the classroom and what was that thing behind her, like sometimes putting yourself back in that situation can actually recall memory. Now in kind of eerie type of extreme of that, deja vu, is when you're back in those similar settings and it almost triggers old memories, but you're applying it to this new situation. So deja vu is this weird feeling that you've actually experienced, heard, seen, been in that situation before. It leads a lot of people to think that like, oh, this is something that's happened to me before, or I knew this was going to happen. But research or brain science has kind of showed us that when you're put back in the same context that's been similar to things being said, how you're feeling, that it might trigger that memory, and we have this sense of deja vu, right? So an eerie feeling that we've seen or heard something before. Okay. Now let's look at context cues in in like an environment. Okay, so here's some research that was done with context cues. And I'm thinking that we should petition to take our AP test in the same room that you had your AP exams in. I'm sorry, your class in. So we should take our AP Psych test in this AP room. All right, so retrieval cues. So here is some information that was done, there we go, on land versus water. So retrieval for context cues. They actually took people and they had them memorize a list of words, and then they were either underwater, so obviously scuba divers, they weren't like drowning them, underwater listening to words, and then they'd ask them to recall them later, all right? And here's what they found out. When they were learning, so hearing the words on water and then recalling them on land, a little over 20% for the recall list. And then flip it. If they're learning them on land and then recalling them in water, a little bit less, all right? Now, if they learned them underwater and were tested underwater, they had almost 10% more recall, so 32%. If they learned them on land and then tested on land, they had almost 40%. And you can think of your own reasons why that is on water. Maybe they're thinking about other things like having to multitask, like keeping your oxygen flow, not getting eaten by sharks, things like that. But when you're tested in the same context that you learned, it's been shown that you increase your learning. We might actually start taking our finals or something in the cafeteria where you'll be taking your AP exam. Ooh, I just had a brilliant idea. Okay, so greater recall when learning and testing contexts were the same versus if they're different. Okay, last slide here. So your mood and memory. So we talked about in the last notes how sometimes stress and hormones can affect memory. So we talked about like the hormones like oxytocin that's released can interfere with long-term memory. Or sometimes memories are so emotionally charged that you remember everything about it, and that was called the flashbulb memory. So your book likes to say that your emotions are like a bank in which you store your memories. So like your emotional state of like being happy or confused. When you're in that state again, you're more likely to recall other times that you were happy, confused, or sad, or what I want to say, like silly. And when you're in that state, it activates those memories. So that's a state-dependent memory. Sometimes, and this has actually been some interesting things done with like, what I want to say, like alcohol-induced states. So people that were drinking well, alcohol interferes with long-term memory, but even though like if you were drinking and you like hid like some money, you're more likely to remember where you hid that money if you drink again. Now, if you have too much alcohol that interferes with long-term, it's not going to be stored. But a state-dependent memory is something like when a memory was made in a certain state or emotion, you're more likely to remember it in that state again. So that's called and this kind of leads into the mood congruent memory, meaning that when you're in that type of mood, you tend to have memories of being in that mood again. So think about if you've ever been having a good day, right? So if like you're having a good day, a positive day, you tend to remember other good things that have happened, and it just kind of keeps going, right? You're like, I'm just having a good day. All these good things are happening, and you tend to remember more positive things. Think about when you're having a bad day, and you're like, everything that's happening to me is bad. When you're in that mood, that your memories are congruent or associated, think of like congruency with math, are associated with that memory. So that's called mood congruent memory. Okay, so those are going to be our last notes on retrieval. In our next notes, we're going to be looking at our memory part 5. This is going to be forgetting. So once we have them encoded and we're able to retrieve them, why do we all of a sudden forget certain memories that we've made?